Yitzchak. Nice everybody to come. Birshus the Rav. Why I'm speaking, basically, but I guess at some point you run out of speakers. But certainly the Kavod Gadol, it's not Parshas Parah, Parshas HaChodesh. Zeisa Torah Adam Ki Yom Ba'el. To be in a Beis Medrash, run like with a Rav, which is Mamish, Nemis Atzmai, Al Torah, multiple dafyonis, multiple shirim. The car is always parked in the garage. I mean, such a schus to have a Rav who's so Meiser Nefesh for the Kehila, for Torah, is a big schus. So to stand in the same spot as the Rav stands, even if it's just once, it's also very with great humility. In our family, Baruch Hashem, a covered for me personally to have my father here, should be well and healthy. Shabarichas Yomim V'Shonim. In our house, in our lives, Thursday night always meant one thing. Thursday night Torah for the last 20, 25 years was the Torah of Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Parachas Achusa Yodin Aleinu. I don't know how many of you are familiar, probably some are, but this was sort of, I was weaned on Pachet Yitzchak as a child, but over time became Rav Moshe. Father lives in Yerushalayim, certainly up until COVID, goes back after Pesach. Thursday night, Tuesday was the Gra and Mishlei. Thursday was the Shir that Rav Moshe would give on the Yonah D'Yom and the Parshas HaShavua. And what I'd like to touch upon tonight is to provide a tamtzis of the Divrei Kedusha that Rav Moshe said with respect to Parshas HaChodesh. He'd have certain themes that he would repeat many times over the years. I heard 20 years of shiur, and probably a third of the time in Parshas HaChodesh related to the concept that we'll discuss. There was a parallel type of shiur. A half hour is not going to allow for time to speak about both, but at least we could speak about one. And he'd cite the Yerushalmi, which would say that in the order of the four parshias, you have some randomness. When Shkolim is going to come, obviously, Aleph Beis, if you yaitz, if you say it in the first month. But one halacha that the Yerushalmi is clear about is that there can't be a Shabbos intervening between Parshas Parah and Parshas HaChodesh. There has to be a direct juxtaposition between those two parshias. And the Yerushalmi draws a parallel to the proximity of these two parshias based on the prohibition of having any time lapse or being mafsik between the third kos and the fourth kos, right? You know that the kosos are keneged a lot of different things, but certainly most commonly the kosos are keneged the four lashonos of Geula. So there's something that the Yerushalmi is indicating that there can't be a hefsek between V'ga'alti and V'lakachti, and that somehow Para is analogous to V'ga'alti, Chodesh is analogous to V'lakachti, and there can't be a break between those two. And so we ask, what's Pshat Yerushalmi? What's the reason that Parshas HaChodesh, first of all, exists only at the end of the Dalet Parshios, and what is the rationale for the necessary proximity between Parah and HaChodesh? Question one. We know that the first mitzvah that Klal Yisrael was commanded as a nation is HaChodesh HaZelachem. Everybody knows that. And what does that mean? Obviously that Beis Din is obligated to all sorts of halachas, Mishnayos Rosh Hashanah, identify the Moiled, be Makadosh LaChodesh, based on the sighting of the Moiled outside Yerushalayim. And based on the proclamations of Beis Din with respect to the new month, we're able to establish the dates of the Yom Tov. First pasuk in Parshas in Perek Yud Beis is Chodesh Hazel Lachem. After that, nothing more about it. The pasuk then goes on and enumerates in detail the mitzvahs, the halachos that are associated with the Korban Pesach. Eating matzah, eating bar, noiser, everything. You have to be mevushal, tzli, everything is cited after that. So you have a sugya where the first pasuk is Parshas HaChodesh, but everything else, it relates only to the Korban Pesach. You'd have to think, what is one mitzvah that is a crowning mitzvah, that is a singular mitzvah that captures Yiddishkeit, and that should justify being the first mitzvah of all of the mitzvahs? You may think of a lot of suggestions. Almost assuredly, none of them would be HaChodesh HaZelachem. You wouldn't say of all things, this is the singular mitzvah that identifies us as Jews, and that would come first. Mitzvahs say, Bezdin has to do it on behalf of Klal Yisrael, but it wouldn't be a core mitzvah. This is not a fundamental mitzvah. Masha Einkein, if we'd have to pick what asay could be the first, which one should identify us as a nation, you'd be a lot worse off than saying Korban Pesach. Makes sense, right? It's the first mitzvah you have together. Ish sela beisavos, sela bayis, you have mishpachas, you have bayis. Kadosh Baruch Hu was Pasach, al bati b'nei Yisrael. There's a lot of reasons why, and it continues today. No matter where Jews are, it comes the night of Pesach, everyone is at the Seder and having Zecher to Matzamar. That would make sense to be the first mitzvah that everybody's supposed to have. Korban Pesach, Mila, Shaila, when you be over Mila, Rambam says only after you're nifter, but it's the only mitzvah say which the absence of doing would necessitate karos. So it also has halachically a very rarefied status within halacha. It makes sense that should be the one mitzvah. So very few mitzvahs are more popular, would front run Korban Pesach if you'd have to pick the singular mitzvah. Nevertheless, even though in Perek Yuday's one pasuk after Achadosh Elochem, we're going to have roughly 20 psukim that are going to speak about Pesach, that are going to speak about Korban Pesach, we don't call it, this is Parshas Pesach, we call it Parshas HaChodesh, and the mitzvah of Achadosh Elochem is the singular mitzvah. And why is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu selected that mitzvah to serve as the crowning mitzvah, that the setup of the Jewish calendar somehow is so important that it should trump all other mitzvahs as the first mitzvah? That's another question we ask. Kli Yakar gives the obvious answer. Why? Well, you can't have Pesach if you don't know when it is. So you have to have Kiddush HaChodesh. Bezdin has to say, this is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. 14 days later, you bring the Korban Pesach, you have the Seder, so it makes sense. Can't argue with it, but Lamaisa, to say that this is the mitzvah, this is the first mitzvah that Klal Yisrael is commanded merely as the result of functionality, spelled out, right? That can't be the real reason why the first mitzvah is just the mechanical mitzvah that allows us to do all the other mitzvahs. It works just for Pesach, but there's so much else that's going to be negaya. Why just that? First Rashi in the Torah, well familiar to all of us, references the Medrash, which asks, why does the Torah begin with Bereshis rather than with the Parsha of HaChodesh HaZelachem? After all, Bereshis is a fascinating sefer. Stories that are incredible. Maisa Avos Siman Lebanon will dictate the trek of Jewish history until the end of time. But the Torah is a halacha book, ultimately, right? It's not a story book. Rashi says, why start telling us a lot of stories? As nice as they are, you could put in a separate sefer, Sefer HaYashar, but you'd think that you should really begin the Torah with the mitzvah. Ultimately, it's about a mitzvah. Ultimately, the Torah is there to generate Chazal. Chazal there to generate Shulchan Aruch, Shailos, and Chuvas forever. Why are we starting with anything other than an actual mitzvah? So Chazal explain, Rashi mentions it, we begin with Bereshis in order to counter the future accusations of the Goyim. They're going to say, you guys are a bunch of thieves. How are you taking over the land of Eretz Yisrael from the Shiva Amin? You have no right to it. And therefore, Chazal say, Rashi brings down, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through Bereshis, supplies us with the ammunition to rebut those accusations. Kayak Masav Higid Liamo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling his nation the prowess of his power. L'seis lahem nachlas Goyim, to give them the legacy of nations. So we needed to do this, we had to get the legacy of nations. In other words, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, we're just living in it. And therefore, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, he has every right to create the land, maybe to give it to the Goyim, and take it away, and give us back the Yerusha, the legacy of the nations. As they state Chazal in the first Rashi. Moshe asks, he says, on its face, this Rashi would suggest that the entire reason for the whole Sefer Bereshis and the first 11 prakim of Shemos, up until the Kriya of Parshas HaChodesh and HaChodesh HaZelachem, was for one reason. It was there to rebut an anticipated claim of the Goyim that we're a bunch of crooks. Where do you have right to this land? So we're going to say, you're questioning us? Look over here. Kadosh Baruch Hu made the world. He gave us whatever it is that you have. If that's the case, and we needed to spend so much space just to rebut that accusation, it would seem that there's a lot more merit to that claim than we would imagine. It seems like a frivolous claim, but if we needed to dedicate so much volume, so much space in the Torah just to do that, then there must be something better. And what deeper meaning lies within this? What does it mean? Lasis lahem nachlas goyim. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us not. What did he give us? Right? And Baruch Hashem, now for the last 70 some odd years, you have Eretz Yisrael. What did we have aside from that? What nachlas goyim? What big Yerusha? What big nachlas did we have? You look around. Maybe now we were putting a Harding Avenue, right, with the restaurant. Maybe Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us Orlando for Pesach als matonom nasa hachse. What's the nachlas goyim that we got that Kadosh Baruch Hu took away from the goyim and gave to us that you need all of the parshios of Bereshis and Shemos to explain? And for that